Emma Hayes walked straight up to Ryan Carter in front of 47 neighbors, looked him dead in the eyes, and said it loud enough for everyone to hear, "One night, no strings. Tomorrow, we go back to hating each other." The whole yard went silent. Ryan's beer stopped halfway to his mouth, and nobody, not one person at that fundraiser, saw what was actually coming. Because what started as the most reckless proposal in suburban history ended up tearing apart a conspiracy that had been running for years. Drop a comment right now. What city are you watching from? I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. You will not want to miss where this goes. Ryan Carter was exhausted in the way that only single fathers who have also spent 6 months at sea can be exhausted. Not just tired. Not just worn down. The kind of exhausted that lives in your bones, that follows you into the shower, that sits across from you at the dinner table while you're pretending to be fine for an 8-year-old girl who is watching your face for signs that the world is okay. He had been home for 11 days. 11 days back from a 7-month deployment. 11 days of trying to remember where everything in his own kitchen was. 11 days of relearning how to sleep in a bed that didn't move, in a house that was completely quiet, in a neighborhood where the loudest thing was usually the sprinkler system at 6 in the morning. Or his neighbor, Emma Hayes, depending on the week, depending on the odds. He had not wanted to come to this fundraiser. The Millbrook Pines Homeowners Association annual charity garden party, or whatever Victor Langley had decided to call it this year, was the last place Ryan wanted to spend a Saturday evening. He had a daughter who had already gone to bed at her grandmother's house, a refrigerator that still needed to be restocked, and a back porch that had been calling his name since the moment he landed back on American soil. But his buddy Marcus, who lived 3 houses down and had zero sympathy for Ryan's post-deployment introversion, had shown up at his door at 5:15 in the afternoon, handed him a cold beer and said, "You've been home 11 days, brother. You have to come back to life at some point." So Ryan came. He wore the gray button-down that his daughter had picked out for him before the deployment because she said it made him look like a real person and not just a Navy man. He drove 200 yards down the street to the Langley's backyard, which had been decorated with string lights and round tables and flower centerpieces that probably cost more than Ryan's monthly grocery budget. He shook hands. He smiled when people asked how the deployment went. He said good and long and glad to be back approximately 14 times in the first 40 minutes. And then, across the yard, he saw Emma. She was standing near the drink table, holding a glass of white wine, with the quiet body language of someone who was also not having the time of their life. Her dark hair was pulled back. She was wearing something green. She was nodding politely at something their neighbor Connie Ashworth was saying, with the specific expression of a person who has completely stopped listening. Ryan looked away. That was the rule. You look away, you move on. They had an unspoken agreement, more of a ceasefire really, where they kept to their own sides of everything. Their own side of the property line. Their own side of the parking dispute that had started 18 months ago over 2 feet of shared driveway. Their own side of whatever silent war had been declared between them, sometime around the 2nd week after Emma moved in 3 years ago, when she had looked at him across the fence and said with the energy of someone who had already made up her mind, "You're the one who parks the truck on the grass, aren't you?" Not a question. A verdict. He had said yes. And she had said nothing. And somehow, from that moment forward, everything between them had been just slightly too sharp to be neutral. Marcus appeared at his elbow with a second beer. "Don't look now," Marcus said, looking directly at Emma. "I'm not looking," Ryan said. "She's been glancing over here for the last 10 minutes. She's probably calculating how much of the driveway I've taken up this week." Marcus laughed. "Man, 3 years and you two still haven't figured it out." "Figured what out?" Marcus gave him the look. The look that meant you know exactly what I mean, and I'm not going to say it out loud because that would make it real. Then he patted Ryan on the shoulder and drifted away toward the food table like the unhelpful best friend he was. Ryan stayed where he was. He told himself he was not watching Emma navigate her way around the yard. He told himself he was just standing there doing a reasonable impression of a man who was enjoying a neighborhood fundraiser, and it had nothing to do with the fact that every time Emma moved to a different part of the yard, his peripheral vision somehow tracked it. That was when she started walking toward him, not drifting, not accidentally ending up in his direction. Walking. Directly. With the specific purpose of someone who had made a decision and was not going to unmake it. Ryan straightened slightly. She stopped in front of him, close enough that he could see she'd barely touched the wine. For a moment she didn't say anything. She just looked at him with an expression he couldn't read, part calculation, part something else he'd never seen on her face before in 3 years of knowing her. Then she said it. One night. Her voice was quiet but completely steady. No strings attached, no relationship, no complications. Tomorrow morning we go back to whatever this is between us, and we don't talk about it. Ryan stared at her. Are you serious right now? I'm very serious. Emma. He lowered his voice even though nobody was standing close enough to hear. We don't even like each other. She tilted her head slightly. I know. Then why? Because, she said, I've been watching you for 3 years, and I'm tired of pretending I haven't been. And you've been doing the same thing. And tonight I just decided I was done pretending. Ryan opened his mouth, closed it. You have until the end of this party to think about it, Emma said. Then she turned and walked calmly back across the yard, rejoined Connie Ashworth's conversation, and lifted her barely touched wine to her lips, as though she hadn't just detonated something inside his chest. He thought about it for exactly 40 minutes. He watched her. She didn't look at him again. Not once. Whatever she'd said it, and now she was done chasing it. The ball was completely in his hands. Marcus found him again near the end of the night. You look like a man who just got news, Marcus said. Something like that. Good news or bad news? Ryan thought about that. I genuinely don't know yet. He stayed until the party started winding down, until the string lights were the most interesting thing left, and people were saying their goodbyes in overlapping waves. He saw Victor Langley working the crowd the way he always did. Handshakes, backslaps, that wide politician smile he aimed at everyone equally. Ryan had always found Victor slightly exhausting. Tonight, for reasons he couldn't name, he found him slightly irritating. He didn't stop to analyze why. He walked across the yard to where Emma was saying goodbye to someone, waited until the conversation ended, and then said quietly, Okay. She looked at him. Okay, he said again. She studied his face for a moment. Whatever she was looking for, she seemed to find it. She nodded once. Give me 20 minutes. They walked to his house separately. That had been her condition, unstated but mutually understood. No walking over together. No letting the neighborhood see them as anything other than what they'd always been. Ryan got home first. He stood in his kitchen and realized he had no idea what he was doing. Not in a bad way. Just in the honest way. The way where you've made a decision and you're following it through, and it's entirely outside anything you planned for. He heard his front door open. She knocked on the frame even though it was open. It was unlocked, he said. I know, Emma said, stepping inside. I knocked anyway. She looked around his kitchen. He watched her taking it in the dry erase board on the refrigerator with his daughter Lily's homework schedule, the small collection of Lily's drawings that had been taped to the cabinet doors since approximately 2021, the Navy coffee mug that said, Deployment complete, that someone had given him as a joke and that he used every single morning. I've never been inside your house, Emma said. No, Ryan said. You haven't. She turned and looked at him. Something had shifted between the backyard and right now. The practiced steadiness she'd had when she made the proposal was slightly different now. Not nervous exactly. More like real. Like she'd taken off something she'd been carrying. Can I ask you something? Ryan said. You can ask. Why tonight? She was quiet for a moment. Then, because you've been home 11 days, and this is the first time I've seen you outside your house, and when I saw you standing there at the party looking like you were somewhere between still at sea and not quite back yet, I thought... She stopped, started again. I thought if I don't say it now, I'm going to spend another 3 years not saying it. Ryan didn't answer right away. Who told you I'd been home 11 days? He asked. She had the grace to look slightly caught. I noticed your truck. You noticed my truck. I noticed things, Emma said simply. And something in that admission, the quiet honesty of it, the way she said it without apology or decoration, did something to the air in the room. You want something to drink? Ryan asked. Do you have anything other than beer? Probably not. Then yes, Emma said. Beer is fine. They sat at his kitchen table. That was the thing that caught Ryan completely off guard. Not the attraction, not the fact that she was there, but the fact that they sat down at his kitchen table and started talking. And 20 minutes later, they were still talking, and then an hour had gone by, and neither of them had moved. She told him she'd been a project manager for 11 years. That she'd moved to Millbrook Pines after a long-term relationship ended, not dramatically, just slowly, the way things go when two people stop building toward the same thing. That she'd been told the neighborhood was quiet and friendly, and exactly the kind of place where you could reset. And then I moved in, Ryan said. And then I moved in, Emma agreed. And within the first week, 3 different people told me you were... She paused. What? He said. What did they tell you? She looked at him directly. That you were arrogant, controlling. That you had a way of making people feel like they weren't worth your time unless you needed something from them. Ryan set his beer down. That's what they said, she continued. And I was new and I didn't have any reason not to believe it. And then you looked at me that first week across the fence like I was slightly annoying and I thought, okay, yeah, that tracks. I didn't look at you like you were annoying, Ryan said. Ryan, I didn't. I'd just gotten back from a short deployment and Lily was going through something at school and he stopped. Okay. Maybe I looked slightly annoyed, but not at you specifically. It didn't read as not at me specifically. He exhaled. Fair. A moment of quiet. What did they tell you about me? Emma asked. He looked at her. Who? The neighbors. Same ones probably. What did they say about me? Ryan was quiet for a beat too long. Ryan, they said you were cold, he said. Selfish. That you didn't care about the community, you were only there for the property value. That you'd reported someone to the city over a fence height violation and acted like it was nothing. Emma stared at him. I have never reported anyone for anything. I know, Ryan said slowly. I know that now. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of some recognition that was just beginning to take shape at the edges of both of their minds. Who told you that? Emma asked. Her voice had changed slightly. Quieter. More careful. Different people, Ryan said. Connie. A couple others. He paused. Victor once or twice. Emma went very still. Victor told me, she said carefully, that you had complained to the association about my parking twice in the first month I moved in, that you'd specifically requested they send me a warning letter. I never did that, Ryan said. I know, she said, because I checked. There's no record of any complaint. They looked at each other across his kitchen table, and in the particular silence that followed, the kind of silence that arrives when two people are standing at the edge of something they haven't named yet, the same thought crossed both of their minds at exactly the same moment. This didn't start with us. None of this started with us. The parking dispute, Ryan said slowly. How did that start? Do you actually remember? Emma thought about it. Someone, I think it was Connie, told me you'd complained that my car was blocking something. But when I looked, there was nothing blocking anything. Someone told me you'd said my truck was an eyesore, Ryan said. That you'd brought it up at an association meeting. I have never once attended an association meeting. I know. Another beat of silence. Ryan, Emma said quietly. I think someone has been lying to both of us. He picked up his beer, set it back down without drinking it. Yeah, he said. I'm starting to think so too. Outside, the string lights at the Langley house were still glowing softly down the street. Inside Ryan Carter's kitchen, at a table that had only ever held one man and his daughter's breakfast cereal, something was beginning. Not what Emma had proposed. Something larger. Something that was going to reach farther than either of them knew. The one-night proposal had just become something else entirely. And neither of them was ready for what they were about to find out. Ryan didn't sleep that night. Not because of Emma, or not only because of Emma, but because of what they'd discovered sitting at his kitchen table at 11:30 at night with two half-finished beers and a conversation that had completely derailed from anything either of them had planned. Someone had been lying to them. Systematically. Deliberately. For 3 years. That wasn't a small thing. That wasn't a misunderstanding or a game of telephone where a story gets slightly twisted as it passes from person to person. What they'd mapped out at that table, comparing notes, trading stories, laying one account next to another, and watching the inconsistencies stack up, pointed to something that had been engineered, constructed, maintained over time by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Ryan lay on his back and stared at the ceiling, and went through it again. The parking complaint that never existed. The association letter Emma supposedly received that she'd never seen. The fence dispute that 3 different people had described 3 different ways. The meeting where Ryan had allegedly said something dismissive about new residents, a meeting he had not attended because he'd been 1,700 miles away on a ship. He'd been at sea. Someone had put words in his mouth while he was at sea. He sat up at 2 in the morning, went to his kitchen, and started writing things down. Emma texted him at 7:45 the next morning. "I went through my emails. Found something. Can you come over?" He was at her door in 6 minutes. She let him in without the ceremony of a greeting and walked straight to her kitchen table, which had her laptop open and a legal pad covered in handwriting next to it. She was still in what she'd slept in, an oversized shirt and shorts, and she had the tight, focused energy of someone who had also not slept much. "Sit down," she said. He sat. "I went back through every email I've ever received from the HOA," Emma said. She turned the laptop toward him. 18 months of correspondence. You know how many times your name comes up? How many? 11 times, she pointed at the screen. Not in official notices, not in meeting minutes, in forwarded messages, casual things. Connie emailing me to give me a heads up that you'd said something. Victor sending a quick note saying he thought I should know you'd raised a concern at the last meeting. She paused. 11 times. All of them positioning you as someone I needed to watch out for. All of them from either Connie or Victor. Ryan leaned forward and read through the first email on the screen. It was from Victor Langley. Dated 14 months ago. Friendly tone. Apologetic. Almost just thought you should know. Ryan brought up the issue of street parking again. At last night's meeting, I told him to let it go. But you know how he is. And it had been sent 3 days after Ryan had deployed. 3 days after he'd shipped out and had no access to his personal email and no ability to respond to anything or defend himself against anything. He knew I was gone, Ryan said. What? Victor knew my deployment schedule. He's been president of this HOA for 6 years. He knows everything that happens on this street. Ryan looked up from the laptop. He sent this 3 days after I deployed, when I couldn't respond, when I couldn't tell you it wasn't true. Emma stared at him for a moment. Then she pulled the legal pad toward her and started writing. Okay, she said. Tell me every story you remember being told about me. Every single one. Who said it when, what exactly they said. As close to word for word as you can get. Ryan started talking. It took 40 minutes. When he finished, Emma had filled 2 pages of the legal pad. She set down the pen, and they both looked at what was there. This accumulated catalog of stories, warnings, offhand comments, and casually dropped pieces of information that had been building a picture of Emma Hayes in Ryan's mind for 3 years. A picture that wasn't her. The fence violation report, Emma said. The one they said I filed against the Garcias next door. Yeah, I need you to look at something. She flipped the laptop back toward her, navigated to something, turned it toward him again. I submitted a public records request to the city 2 weeks ago. For completely different reasons, I was trying to find out about a permit issue with my garage. But this came back in the same response. She pointed at the document on screen. Ryan read it. It was a complaint filed with the city's code enforcement office. Fence height violation, 14 Millbrook Pines, Drive the Garcias' address, filed anonymously. Filed on a date when Ryan had been home, when he would have been visible in the neighborhood, when anyone watching from a distance might have assumed he was the one who filed it. "It's anonymous," Ryan said. "Anonymous?" Emma confirmed. "But Connie told me it was you within 2 days of it being filed. She said she'd heard it directly from Victor that you'd finally gotten fed up with their fence and reported them." "I have never had a problem with the Garcias," Ryan said flatly. "I've had dinner at their house." "I know that now." He stood up from the table, walked to her kitchen window, and stood there for a moment with his hands on the edge of the counter, thinking. "Why?" he said. "That's what I keep coming back to. Why would he do this? What does Victor Langley get out of us not getting along?" Emma was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking about that since 2 in the morning. She hesitated. "Can I show you something else?" He turned around. She opened a different file on her laptop. "I'm a project manager. I work with contracts and budgets professionally. And a few months ago, before any of this, before last night, I noticed something in the HOA's annual financial report that felt off to me." She turned the screen toward him again. "Victor controls all the vendor contracts for the neighborhood. Landscaping maintenance, the community pool service, the annual repaving. All of it goes through him, and all of it gets approved at the quarterly meetings." "Okay," Ryan said slowly. "The landscaping contract is with a company called Green Valley Services. Has been for 4 years. She pointed at a line item on the screen. They bill the HOA $43,000 a year. That seems high. It is high. It's about 30% above market rate for a neighborhood this size." Emma met his eyes. Green Valley Services LLC was registered in this state 4 years ago. The registered agent's address is a P.O. box. She paused. "I paid $32 for a business records search last week. The sole owner of Green Valley Services is a woman named Patricia Langley." The room went very quiet. "Victor's wife," Ryan said. "Victor's wife," Emma confirmed. Ryan pulled out the chair across from her and sat back down. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "He's been running a contract to his own family," Ryan said, "through the HOA budget, money that every homeowner on this street contributes to, for 4 years, and probably longer in other ways I haven't found yet." Emma's voice was controlled, but her hands on the table were not entirely steady. "This is why he needed control of the HOA. This is why he needed people distracted, fighting with each other, too busy with whatever the current neighborhood drama was to look at what was actually happening with the finances." "And we were the drama," Ryan said. The words landed flat and heavy between them. "We were the drama," Emma said quietly. "For 3 years. Every time a meeting came up where someone might start asking questions about vendor costs or budget transparency, there was always something, some new conflict, some new story about one of us, something to redirect the conversation." Ryan thought about the last 2 years of HOA meetings, the ones he'd actually managed to attend between deployments. He thought about the arguments that had erupted always over something minor, always involving him or Emma or both. The parking thing, the fence thing. The time someone had accused him of letting Lily's bicycle block the sidewalk, which had somehow turned into a 40-minute neighborhood meeting. Victor had run every one of those meetings. Victor had steered every one of those conversations. "He's good at it," Ryan said, and there was something almost reluctant in his voice, the acknowledgement that they'd been played by someone who genuinely knew what he was doing. 3 years and neither of us saw it. We were too busy disliking each other to see anything else." "I know," Emma said. "I don't like being played." "Neither do I." He looked at her across the table. In the morning light, with the legal pad between them and the laptop open to 4 years of financial records, she looked nothing like the woman he'd spent 3 years keeping at arm's length. She looked focused, and a little fierce, and entirely, completely real. "We need more than this," he said. "What we have right now is circumstantial. The wife's business, the pricing, the emails, It paints a picture, but Victor is smart. He'll have explanations for all of it. I know, Emma said. That's why I called someone this morning. Who? My cousin. She's an attorney, not HOA law, but she knows the structure. I asked her what it would take to actually remove an HOA president for financial misconduct. Emma looked at him steadily. She said we'd need a formal petition signed by at least 30% of homeowners, documented evidence of the financial irregularities, and ideally testimony from other residents who've been directly harmed. 30%, Ryan said. That's what 15 families on this street. 16 technically. And we don't know who we can trust. Victor's been here 6 years. Some of these people think he walks on water. Some of them, Emma agreed, but not all of them. She paused. The Garcias had that complaint filed against them anonymously. They were furious about it. I saw Carmen Garcia's face at the last block party when someone brought it up. She was still angry. And she has no idea it wasn't you. Ryan was quiet for a moment. That's a conversation I need to have. There's also Dave Kowalski, Emma said. He tried to get a second bid on the pool service contract 2 years ago. Brought it to Victor. Victor shut it down in about 4 minutes flat, and Dave has been bitter about it ever since. I know Dave. He'll talk. Ryan pulled the legal pad toward him and looked at the list Emma had built. Who else? They spent the next hour going through every family on the street, not gossiping, cataloging. Who had been pulled into conflicts that now seemed manufactured? Who had voiced concerns about HOA spending that had been quietly dismissed? Who had stopped coming to meetings and why? By the end of it, they had 9 names. 9 families who had their own small stories, their own moments of something not quite adding up that they'd each written off separately as minor neighborhood friction. 9 isn't 16, Emma said. No, Ryan agreed. But 9 is a start. And once people start talking to each other directly, instead of through Victor and Connie, that number's going to change. He looked up from the legal pad and found Emma watching him with an expression he couldn't quite categorize. What? He said. Nothing, she said. I'm just... She stopped. Started again. For 3 years, I thought you were someone specific, someone I'd been told about, and sitting here right now, you are nothing like that person. Ryan held her gaze. For 3 years, I thought the same about you. I know. For what it's worth, he said. I'm sorry I didn't question it sooner. The things they told me about you. I should have... Don't, Emma said. We both believed what we were told because it was easier than finding out the truth. That's on both of us. She paused. And also on the man who worked very hard to make sure the truth stayed buried. A silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable. The kind of silence that sits between people who have covered a lot of ground quickly and are catching their breath. I should go, Ryan said finally. I'm picking up Lily from my mother's at noon. Emma nodded. He stood, picked up the pages of notes they'd made, and looked at them for a moment, then set them back on her table. Can you make copies of those emails? The ones from Victor? Already printed, Emma said. She slid a folder across the table toward him. 11 emails printed on clean white paper, highlighted in 3 colors. He looked at the folder, looked at her. When did you print these? He asked. 6:15 this morning. Before you texted me. Before I texted you. There was something in that, the 6:15 preparation, the color-coded highlights, the already built folder, that told him something about Emma Hayes that 3 years of manufactured conflict had completely obscured. She was precise. She was thorough. She moved toward problems instead of away from them. He'd been told she was cold. What she actually was, he was starting to understand, was someone who didn't waste motion. Okay, Ryan said. He picked up the folder. I'll talk to the Garcias this week, and Dave. I'll reach out to the others, Emma said, quietly, one at a time. He walked to her front door. She followed. He turned back at the threshold. They were close enough that he was aware of it. The same proximity that had meant something very different 12 hours ago, before they'd sat down at his kitchen table and had an entirely different kind of night than either of them had planned. Emma, he said. I know, she said before he could finish. We didn't, he started. I know, she said again, not with disappointment, with something that was almost amusement. We had the most important conversation I've had in 3 years instead. I think that probably counts for more. He didn't answer that. He wasn't sure he had the right words for it yet. He walked down her front steps and back to his house, the folder under his arm, the morning air still cool, the street quiet around him. As he walked, he glanced at the Langley house, the manicured front lawn, the American flag on the porch post, the brand new welcome sign by the mailbox that had gone up last spring. He thought about Victor Langley's smile at the party last night. That wide, easy, practiced smile that landed on everyone the same way, like it had been calibrated to make you feel included without actually letting you in. He thought about how good Victor was at being trusted. And he thought about how much ground they were going to have to cover before they could take him apart. He had no idea yet just how much further this was going to go. He just knew they were going to follow it, all the way to the end. The Garcias had lived at 14 Millbrook Pines Drive for 9 years. They had been on the street longer than Victor Langley had been HOA president. Longer than Ryan had moved in. Longer than almost anyone except old Harold Briggs at the end of the cul-de-sac, who had been there since the neighborhood was built and mostly kept to himself and his vegetable garden. Carmen Garcia answered the door on a Tuesday evening with a dish towel in her hand and the specific expression of someone who is in the middle of cooking dinner and fully prepared to tell whoever is at the door that it is not a good time. Then she saw Ryan. The expression shifted. Not to warmth, to something more guarded, more careful. Ryan, she said. Carmen. He kept his voice easy. I'm sorry to drop by without calling. I won't take much of your time, but I need to talk to you and Miguel about something, and I need you to hear me out before you decide how you feel about it. She studied him for a moment. In the background, he could hear the television and the sound of something simmering on the stove. Miguel, she called without taking her eyes off Ryan. Come to the door. Miguel Garcia appeared behind his wife 30 seconds later. He was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s who worked in construction management and had exactly zero interest in neighborhood politics, which was exactly why Ryan had wanted to talk to him first. Miguel didn't play games. He'd either believe Ryan or he wouldn't, and there would be no performance either way. He looked at Ryan with the neutral expression of a man reserving judgment. You want to come in, Miguel said, if you'll let me. They sat at the Garcia's kitchen table, Ryan noticing distantly that this was the third kitchen table in 4 days that had hosted a conversation that mattered, and Ryan laid out what he and Emma had found. He didn't dress it up. He didn't soften the parts that made him look bad, including the fact that for 18 months he'd believed the story about Carmen filing a complaint without ever once walking 40 feet to ask her directly. When he finished, Carmen and Miguel looked at each other across the table with the particular marital shorthand of people who have been together long enough to have full conversations without speaking. Then Carmen looked at Ryan and said, I cried. Carmen, when they told me you'd filed that complaint, she said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were not. I cried. Because I had brought you food when you came back from your first deployment. I had watched Lily in my yard so many times. And then I was told you'd gone to the city behind my back, over a fence that has been exactly that height since we built it 11 years ago. She stopped. I didn't speak to you for 8 months because of that. I know, Ryan said quietly. I know. And I'm sorry. Not for something I did because I didn't do it. But I'm sorry I let 8 months go by without asking you to your face whether it was true. Another look between Carmen and Miguel. Who filed it? Miguel asked. We don't know for certain yet, Ryan said. But I think you probably know who benefits most from neighbors not talking to each other. Miguel's jaw tightened. Victor? We think so. I never liked that man, Miguel said with the flat, certain tone of someone stating a fact they've held privately for a long time. He smiles too much. Men who smile that much at everyone are usually smiling at no one. We're building a case, Ryan said. Financial Records emails a contract that's been running to his wife's company for 4 years at above-market rates. But we need people. We need residents who've had their own experiences, moments where something didn't add up, where they were told something about a neighbor that might not have been true. Carmen put her dish towel on the table. "The Hendersons on the corner," she said immediately. "Sandra Henderson told me last year that Victor had warned her about the Nguyens next door, said they'd been cited for a noise violation. The Nguyens are the quietest family on this street. I have never once heard anything from that house." "Write it down," Ryan said. He slid his legal pad across the table. "Everything you remember. Dates, if you have them." Carmen picked up the pen without hesitating. That was the moment Ryan understood that they were going to get their 16 families. People had been waiting, he realized. Not consciously, not in the way where they'd been sitting at home, ready to revolt. But the material had been accumulating. The small grievances, the moments of confusion, the interactions that had felt slightly wrong, without anyone being able to say exactly why. All of it sitting in people's memories, like evidence in an unlabeled box, waiting for someone to come along and say, "You're not imagining it. It's connected. Here's what it connects to." Carmen filled a full page of the legal pad before she stopped. Ryan drove home with more than he'd come with. Emma was handling the other side of the street. She was methodical about it in the way she was methodical about everything. She didn't cold call or show up unannounced. She texted first, kept it simple, said she had something she wanted to share, and could she stop by. She presented herself as a neighbor who'd found some information about HOA finances, and wanted to see if it matched anyone else's experience. Low pressure, no alarm bells. She found what Ryan found in different houses with different faces. Dave Kowalski sat across from her in his living room and spent 25 minutes describing the meeting 2 years ago, where he'd tried to propose opening the pool service contract to competitive bidding, and Victor had outmaneuvered him so smoothly that Dave had walked out of that meeting feeling like he'd been the unreasonable one. "He does that," Dave said. "He makes you feel like the problem is your approach, not his answer. Like if you'd just been a little more reasonable, a little less confrontational, things would have gone differently." Dave shook his head. "I backed down. I shouldn't have backed down." "You didn't have what we have now," Emma said. "You had a feeling. Feelings are hard to stand behind in a room full of people who've been told you're just difficult." Dave looked at her. "This is really real, isn't it? This isn't just a billing discrepancy." "No," Emma said. "It's not. How much are we talking total over 4 years?" Emma had done the math. She'd done it 3 times to make sure she had it right. "Conservative estimate based on what I can document, somewhere between $60,000 and $80,000 in inflated contract payments to a company his wife owns." Dave Kowalski went very quiet. He stopped. "That's every homeowner on this street. That's our money." "Yes," Emma said. "It is." She left his house with his signature on the petition her cousin had helped her draft. She also left with 2 more names' families. Dave had his own reasons to believe might listen. The network was building itself now. The thing about a neighborhood Emma was learning was that the version of it you saw from your own house was only a fraction of what was actually happening. Victor had understood that. He'd kept everyone operating in their own small frame of vision, seeing only what he wanted them to see, talking only through the channels he controlled. The moment people started talking directly to each other, unfiltered, unmanaged, everything he'd built started to develop cracks. By Thursday evening, Emma and Ryan had spoken to 11 families. By Friday afternoon, they had 9 signatures on the petition. By Saturday morning, the day of the emergency HOA meeting they'd requested through proper channels, a right guaranteed to any resident who could collect signatures from 20% of homeowners, they had 14 signatures. 14 families who had their own piece of the story, their own moment where something hadn't added up, their own experience of being quietly redirected, misinformed, or manipulated by a man who had spent 6 years making himself indispensable and unquestioned. Ryan and Emma sat in his kitchen the night before the meeting. The legal pad had been replaced by a laptop and a printed folder that was now 47 pages thick. Emails, financial records, the business registration for Green Valley Services, a timeline they'd constructed of every documented incident they could tie to Victor's interference, and signed statements from 8 residents who'd agreed to go on record. "He's going to fight it," Ryan said. "I know. Victor's smart. He's been doing this for 6 years. He's going to come in tomorrow with explanations for everything. He's going to make this about us." "I know," Emma said again. "Are you ready for that?" She looked up from the folder. "Are you?" He thought about it honestly. "I don't love being the center of attention. I spent 20 years in the Navy specifically because I like clear missions and defined objectives and not having to manage how a room full of civilians feels about me. That's very specific." "I'm a specific person." The corner of her mouth moved. "The answer is yes," she said. "I'm ready, because everything in that folder is documented and verifiable, and Victor Langley can explain all of it if he wants to, but he can't unexplain it. Facts don't have feelings." Ryan nodded slowly. "Facts don't have feelings," he repeated. "That's good. I have my moments." He looked at her across the table. In the week since the fundraiser, they had spoken every day, sometimes twice. Not about anything personal, or not mostly. Almost entirely about Victor and the case they were building. But somewhere in those conversations, in the hours of careful, meticulous work they'd done side by side, something had shifted. He was aware of it the way you're aware of a change in weather, not by seeing it happen, but by the way everything feels different after. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You can ask." "The proposal, the night of the fundraiser." He watched her face. "Was that actually about what you said it was?" She held his gaze without flinching. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he chose his words carefully, "you'd already printed those emails by 6:15 the next morning. You'd already submitted the public records request 2 weeks before. You were already looking into Victor before that night." He paused. "Did you come to me because you needed a partner on this? Someone with standing in the neighborhood. Someone people would take seriously because they'd seen him show up for 6 years." Emma was quiet for a long moment. He respected that she didn't answer immediately. A lesser person would have rushed to deny it. "Partly," she said finally. "Maybe partly." She didn't look away from him. "But not mostly. The truth is, I'd been looking at this for weeks and I didn't know what to do with it alone. I needed someone I could trust, and I had..." She stopped. "I had this completely irrational conviction, for reasons I couldn't fully explain, that you were someone I could trust, even after 3 years of being told the opposite." "Irrational," Ryan said. "That's how I'd describe it, yes. Even though everything you'd been told, everything I'd been told was wrong," she said. "And somewhere underneath all of it, some part of me knew that, or suspected it." She paused. "Why do you think I was so angry all the time I was angry? Because what I was seeing didn't match what I was being told, and I didn't know how to hold both things at once." He sat with that for a moment. "You were angry?" he said slowly. "Because the story didn't fit?" "Yes. Because you're someone who notices when things don't add up." "Yes. That's why you caught the financial records." "Ryan, I'm serious. Most people wouldn't have looked. Most people get a financial report from the HOA and they file it and they move on. You looked because you're someone who can't leave a number that doesn't make sense." Emma looked at him with an expression that was somewhere between amused and genuinely caught off guard. Like she hadn't expected that particular observation from him and wasn't sure how to receive it. "I'm good at my job," she said a little carefully. "I know you are," he said. "I've known you were good at your job for 3 years. I just wasn't allowed to say so." She laughed at that, a real laugh, the kind that surprised her, and the sound of it in his kitchen at 11 o'clock at night did something to the quality of the air in the room. "Get some sleep," Ryan said, standing up. "Tomorrow's going to be a long day." "I know. And Emma..." He stopped at his kitchen doorway. "Whatever happens in that room tomorrow, however Victor plays it, however bad it gets before it gets better." He looked at her steadily. "We don't split. We stay together. Whatever he says, whatever he tries to use against us, we stand there and we let him say it and we don't move." Emma looked back at him with something in her face he was only beginning to learn how to read. "Together," she said. Together. She gathered her copy of the folder and her bag and walked to his front door. He followed. At the threshold, she turned back, and for a moment they stood there the way they had a week ago, close in a doorway the night between them, except everything was different now. Everything was in some way he couldn't have predicted better. Ryan, she said. Yeah. For what it's worth. She held his gaze. You're nothing like what they told me. He didn't answer right away. Then, neither are you. She walked down his front steps and back to her house. He stood in the doorway and watched until her porch light came on, and then he closed the door and went to sit alone in his kitchen for a while, thinking about tomorrow. In the Langley house down the street, the lights were still on. Victor was awake too. Whether he knew what was coming, Ryan couldn't say. But there was something about the way those lights stayed on burning steadily at midnight, in a house where the HOA president lived with his absolutely legitimate, completely unrelated wife, and her completely unrelated landscaping company, that felt like the last quiet hours before a storm breaks. Ryan had been in actual storms. At sea in the middle of the Pacific with nothing between him and the weather but 30 tons of steel, and the training to know what to do when everything gets loud and fast and disorienting. He knew how to hold his position when things got rough. Tomorrow, they were going to find out whether that was enough. The community center at Millbrook Pines held 46 chairs. Ryan counted them when he arrived, because counting things was something he did when he needed to stay calm. And he needed to stay calm, and 46 chairs, arranged in a semicircle around a folding table at the front of the room, was the kind of detail that gave his hands something to do, while his mind worked through everything that could go wrong in the next 2 hours. 31 of those chairs were filled by the time the meeting started. That was more than Ryan had expected, more he suspected than Victor had expected. Because Victor was already at the front table when Ryan and Emma walked in together, and when he saw the room, saw how many people had come, saw the folder under Emma's arm, saw the way Ryan and Emma entered side by side. Without the performance of casual distance they'd maintained for 3 years, something moved across Victor's face that he controlled within a half second. But Ryan had spent 20 years reading situations under pressure. He caught it. Fear. Quick and real, and immediately buried under that wide, practiced smile. Good, Ryan thought. Let him be afraid. Emma sat in the front row. Ryan sat beside her. Behind them, the Garcias sat together. Dave Kowalski was 2 rows back. The Nguyen's, the Hendersons, the Patels from the corner house, one by one, the faces Ryan had spent a week talking to, listening to building something with filled in the rows behind him. Victor called the meeting to order at 7 o'clock exactly. He was wearing a pressed blue shirt and the confident, slightly paternal energy of a man who has run 100 of these meetings and considers himself the most capable person in any room he walks into. I understand we have some concerns to address tonight. Victor began spreading his hands in the gesture of a man being generous with his time. I want everyone to know that this association has always operated with full transparency, and I welcome the opportunity to clear up any confusion. Ryan watched the room, watched how people received Victor's tone. Some of them, the ones who hadn't been part of the week's conversations, were nodding slightly, reassured by the familiarity of him, by the practiced warmth. Emma opened her folder. Victor, she said. Her voice was clear and even, not aggressive, not nervous. I'd like to start with the Green Valley Services contract. Can you walk us through the selection process for that vendor? A small pause, imperceptible to most people in the room. Of course, Victor said. Green Valley Services was chosen through a competitive bid process 4 years ago. They offered the best combination of price and reliability. Can you share the documentation from that bid process? Emma asked. The competing bids, the evaluation criteria, the minutes from the meeting where it was approved. Another pause, slightly longer. Those records would be in the association archives, Victor said smoothly. I'm happy to pull them and share them with any resident who submits a formal request. I submitted a formal request 6 weeks ago, Emma said. She reached into the folder and placed a single sheet of paper on the table in front of her. This is the written response I received. The association has no record of competing bids for the Green Valley Services contract. The room shifted, not dramatically, but Ryan felt it the specific quality of attention, changing the way 31 people who had come to a neighborhood meeting at 7 o'clock on a Saturday evening suddenly became 31 people who were paying a different kind of attention. Victor's smile stayed exactly where it was. Record-keeping in volunteer organizations can sometimes be imperfect. Patricia Langley, Emma said. The smile finally moved. Just slightly. Just enough. I'm sorry, Victor said. Patricia Langley is the registered owner of Green Valley Services, LLC. Emma's voice remained completely level. She registered the business 4 years ago, 3 months before the HOA signed its first contract with that company. She placed another sheet on the table. This is the business registration. This is the contract. And this, another sheet, is a comparison of Green Valley Services billing rates against 3 other licensed landscaping companies operating in this county. Green Valley bills approximately 31% above the average market rate. The room was very quiet now. Victor set both hands flat on the table. Patricia's involvement in a small business has absolutely no bearing on the association's contracting decisions. I recused myself from... The meeting minutes don't reflect any recusal, Emma said. She placed the minutes on the table. Your name appears as the motion maker on the original contract approval, and on each of the 3 subsequent renewals. Someone in the third row said quietly but audibly, "Oh my God." Victor turned his eyes to Ryan. The move was deliberate, a pivot. Ryan had seen it coming. "I want to address something," Victor said, his voice taking on a different quality, now warmer, more intimate, aimed at the room, but built for Ryan. "I think it's important that we consider the context of what's happening here." He paused for effect. "Chief Carter and Ms. Hayes have developed a recent personal relationship. I think most of us in this room understand that people sometimes make accusations when they're trying to..." "Victor." Ryan's voice was quiet. Not loud, not angry. The kind of quiet that takes up more space than volume. "Don't. I'm simply pointing out that the timing..." "You're trying to change the subject," Ryan said. "The subject is your wife's company. The subject is $68,000. He let that number sit in the air for a moment. He and Emma had finalized the calculation the night before. $68,420 over 4 years in excess billing above market rate. That's the subject. Everything else is noise." Victor's eyes moved across the room. Calculating, reading faces, looking for the allies he'd spent 6 years cultivating. Some of them were there. Connie Ashworth in the back row, her face arranged in the expression of a woman who has decided in advance that she will not be moved. 2 or 3 others who'd always been in Victor's orbit, who'd been the recipients of his attention and his favors and his carefully placed confidences. But there weren't enough of them, and Victor was smart enough to know it. He tried one more angle. "Carmen," he said, turning to the Garcias with an expression of injured reasonableness. "Miguel, you've known me for years. You know I've always acted in the best interest of this community." Carmen Garcia looked at Victor Langley for a long moment. Then she said, "Someone filed a complaint with the city against our fence. An anonymous complaint. Our fence that has been standing for 11 years. Her voice was steady and completely devastating. "You told me it was Ryan. You told me he'd been pushing to get it addressed for months. You told me to my face." "Carmen, that was based on information I'd received." "From who?" Carmen said. "Who told you? Because I've asked Ryan directly. He never filed anything. He didn't even know about it until last week. There must have been a miscommunication. Who filed the complaint?" "Victor." Dave Kowalski's voice from 2 rows back. Flat, direct. Dave had worked in construction long enough that he had 0 patience for evasion, and it showed. "I can't speak to the specifics of an anonymous..." "Did you file it?" Dave said. The room held its breath. Victor Langley looked at Dave Kowalski, and then at Carmen Garcia, and then at Emma's 47-page folder, and then at the 31 faces, turned toward him in a semicircle, and for the first time in 6 years behind that table, he had nothing left to reach for. "This meeting is not the appropriate venue for these kinds of accusations," he said. "I'm going to recommend we table this discussion and reconvene with proper—" "We have a petition," Emma said. She placed it on the table. 14 signatures. 14 families requesting a formal vote on the removal of the HOA president under Section 7.4 of the Millbrook Pines Association bylaws, citing documented financial misconduct and breach of fiduciary duty. Victor looked at the petition. Ryan watched him read the names. Watched him count. Watched the moment when Victor Langley, who had managed, manipulated, and maneuvered this neighborhood for 6 years, with the patience and precision of a man who believed he was untouchable, understood that it was over. Not explosively, not with a confession or a dramatic collapse. Just a slow, visible deflation. Like watching something that had been held under pressure for a long time finally lose the thing that was keeping it up. "You need a vote of the full membership for removal," Victor said. His voice had changed, thinner. "A petition only triggers a special meeting. It doesn't—" "We know the bylaws," Ryan said. "We've read them. We're requesting the special meeting. It'll be scheduled within 30 days. He paused. "You're welcome to come and make your case." Victor stood up from the table. For a moment, he just stood there, looking at the room. And Ryan could see it not guilt exactly. Victor Langley wasn't the kind of man who felt guilt about what he'd done. But something. The recognition that the architecture he'd spent years building had just come apart in a single Saturday evening. That all the carefully maintained divisions, all the manufactured conflicts, all the small strategic lies that had kept people looking sideways at each other instead of straight at him, all of it had dissolved the moment people simply started talking to each other. "I built this community," Victor said. He said it to the room, but he was looking at Ryan when he said it. "Excuse me," Carmen said. "I have given 6 years. You took $68,000, Dave said, from people who trusted you." Victor's jaw tightened. He picked up his notes from the table. He turned to leave. Then he stopped and turned back, and something shifted in his face, something harder and less controlled than anything he'd shown in the last hour. He looked directly at Ryan and Emma. "You're only doing this," he said, "because you're sleeping together. Everyone in this room knows that. You found each other, and now you're manufacturing a crusade to make yourselves feel important." The room went very still. Ryan looked at Emma. Emma looked back at Ryan. And then neither of them planned it. It wasn't coordinated, it simply happened. They both turned back to face Victor Langley and said nothing. Didn't deny it. Didn't confirm it. Just stood there side by side, completely unmoved. Because the thing about accusation as a weapon is that it only works when the person being accused is ashamed of something. When they're afraid of how it looks. When the threat of exposure is enough to make them step back, lower their eyes, abandon their position. Ryan Carter had nothing to be ashamed of. And Emma Hayes had stopped being afraid of how things looked approximately 4 days ago. So they just stood there, together, and Victor Langley walked out. The room erupted the moment the door closed, not in chaos, but in the specific sound of 31 people who have just witnessed something significant and need to process it out loud. Voices overlapping, people turning to each other. Carmen reaching across the aisle to squeeze Emma's hand. Dave Kowalski laughing a little, because sometimes when the pressure breaks, the only thing left is something almost like relief. Ryan stayed where he was for a moment. Marcus appeared at his elbow. He'd been in the back row quiet the whole time, which for Marcus was genuinely extraordinary, and said, "Brother." "Yeah," Ryan said. "That was—" Marcus searched for the word. "I don't have a word for that." "Me neither." "Are you okay?" Ryan thought about it honestly. His heart rate was elevated. His hands were steady. He felt the specific kind of tired that comes after sustained high-stakes concentration, the same way he felt after difficult operations at sea, wrung out and alert at the same time. "Yeah," he said. "I'm okay." He turned to look at Emma. She was talking to Carmen. The two of them bent over the petition with their heads close together, Carmen pointing at something and Emma nodding. She hadn't looked at him since Victor walked out. She was already working the next step. That was her. He was starting to understand that about her. She didn't stop to celebrate. She identified the next thing that needed to happen and moved toward it. He watched her for a moment in the noise of the room. He thought about what Victor had said. The accusation, the sneering certainty that they were only there because of something personal. That everything they'd built this week, the folder, the conversations, the petition, the $68,000 laid bare in front of 31 neighbors, was reducible to a personal motivation, to something small and private and therefore dismissible. It made Ryan angry, but it was the clean kind of angry, the kind that clarifies rather than clouds, because the truth was yes. It had started personally. It had started at a kitchen table at midnight with two people who'd been kept apart by manufactured lies, finally sitting down and talking honestly. It had started personally, and it had become something else, something larger, something that affected every person in that room. And maybe that was okay. Maybe that was how most things that matter actually start. Not with institutions or formal investigations, or people who have the authority and the resources and the clean official mandate to fix things. But with two people at a table late at night comparing notes, realizing the story they'd been told doesn't hold together. Emma caught his eye across the room. She didn't smile. She just looked at him for a moment with that direct, steady gaze that he was learning was her version of saying something without words. Then she turned back to Carmen. Ryan exhaled. The vote for Victor's removal would be scheduled within 30 days. The financial records had already been shared with the state attorney's office. That was a step Emma's cousin had walked them through, and they'd made the submission 2 days before the meeting, quietly without announcing it. Whatever happened at the HOA level, whatever the neighborhood ultimately decided, there was now a paper trail in front of people whose job it was to follow it. Victor Langley's next 30 days were going to be very different from the last 6 years. And Millbrook Pines, this small, ordinary street with its 46-chair community center, and its string lights, and its 9-year-old fences, and its overlapping, complicated, imperfect collection of families, was going to have to figure out what it looked like when nobody was steering it toward conflict anymore. Ryan didn't know yet what that looked like, but for the first time in 3 years, standing in a room full of neighbors who were looking at each other with something other than suspicion, he found he was genuinely curious to find out. The 30 days after the meeting were not quiet. Ryan hadn't expected them to be. He'd spent enough time in the Navy to know that the moment after a major operation is never the clean, peaceful resolution it looks like from the outside. There's always cleanup, always aftermath, always the part nobody films, because it isn't dramatic. It's just slow, careful, necessary work. Victor Langley did not go gently. In the first week, he sent a letter to every homeowner on the street through the HOA's official mailing list, which he still had access to because nobody had technically removed him yet, and Victor was precise about what he still technically had, laying out his defense in 4 single-spaced pages. The bid process had been legitimate. The pricing was justified by Green Valley's superior service record. His wife's ownership of the company had been disclosed verbally at a board meeting years ago. The petition was the result of a personal vendetta driven by 2 residents who had fabricated a relationship specifically to manufacture grounds for his removal. Ryan read the letter at his kitchen table on a Tuesday morning with a cup of coffee, and the particular patience of a man who has learned that the loudest response to something is usually not the most effective one. He set the letter down and called Emma. "I got it," she said before he could speak. "How many factual errors did you count?" 7, Emma said. "The verbal disclosure claim is the most interesting one, because if he disclosed verbally, there should be a record in the meeting minutes. And the meeting minutes—" "Don't mention it," Ryan said. "Don't mention it," Emma confirmed. "I've already sent that to my cousin. She's forwarding it to the attorney's office as an example of ongoing misrepresentation." He could hear in her voice that she'd been awake for a while, that she'd already read it twice, already worked out the angles, already taken the next step before he'd finished his first cup of coffee. "Emma," he said. "Yeah. You okay?" A pause. Different from the pauses she took when she was thinking through a problem. This one was personal. "I'm tired," she said. "I'm really tired. And I know we're not done yet. And I know there are 30 more things on the list, and I know the vote is in 3 weeks, but I'm—" She stopped. "Yeah, I'm tired." Come over, Ryan said. Ryan, not for anything. Just come over. Lily is home today. Her school has some kind of teacher development day, and she's been asking to show you the project she did for science class for approximately 4 days. Come over and look at the science project and drink coffee, and we will not talk about Victor Langley for 1 hour. A longer pause. 1 hour, Emma said. 1 hour. She was at his door in 15 minutes. Lily Carter was 8 years old and had her father's directness and her late mother's eyes and absolutely zero interest in the neighborhood politics that had been consuming the adults around her for the past month. What she had instead was a working model of the water cycle, built from a glass bowl plastic wrap and a lamp which she had constructed entirely by herself and which she needed Emma to understand completely before she could move on with her day. Ryan stood in the kitchen doorway and watched Emma sit cross-legged on the living room floor, across from his daughter, listening to an explanation of evaporation with the full, genuine attention of someone who was actually interested. And then it condenses, Lily said, pointing at the plastic wrap where small droplets had formed. See? It goes up, and then it comes back down. It's always the same water. It just keeps going around. That's incredible, Emma said. Not in the performative way adults sometimes talk to children. In the real way. Dad says that's like deployments, Lily said matter-of-factly. He goes away and then he comes back. Same dad. Just went around. Ryan looked at the ceiling. Emma looked over her shoulder at him with an expression he was beginning to recognize, the one that meant she had been caught off guard by something, and was trying to decide how she felt about it. Your dad's pretty smart, Emma said. Sometimes, Lily said with the serene confidence of an 8-year-old delivering an objective assessment. He burns toast a lot. I do, Ryan confirmed from the doorway. That part is accurate. Emma laughed. That real laugh again, the one that surprised her. She turned back to Lily's water cycle and asked 3 more questions. Real questions, not filler. And Lily answered all of them with the focused intensity of a child who has found an adult willing to take her seriously. Ryan made coffee. He stood at the kitchen counter and made coffee and listened to his daughter explain condensation to his neighbor and felt something in his chest that was quiet and warm and entirely unfamiliar in the specific way that good things sometimes are when you've been without them long enough that you've stopped expecting them. He didn't name it. Not yet. It was too early to name it, and he was a careful man about the things that mattered. But he felt it. The 1 hour stretched to 2. Then Lily announced she needed lunch and disappeared to negotiate with the refrigerator, and Ryan and Emma sat at the kitchen table with their second cups of coffee and didn't talk about Victor for a while longer. She's remarkable, Emma said. She is, Ryan said simply. No false modesty, no deflection. Just the plain acknowledgement of a father who knows what he has. She looks like you. People say she has her mother's eyes. Emma looked at him carefully. They had not talked about this. About Sarah, who had died when Lily was 2 in a car accident on a winter road, in the specific kind of loss that doesn't have a villain and doesn't have a lesson and just sits there in the shape of everything that didn't happen after. I'm sorry, Emma said. It was 6 years ago, Ryan said. Then, because that answer wasn't honest enough, it still comes up, in ways I don't always expect. Does Lily? She doesn't remember her. She was too young. He turned the coffee cup in his hands. We talk about her. I make sure of that. I don't want Sarah to be a silence in this house. He paused. But Lily doesn't have grief about it the way I do. She just has curiosity. She asks questions about who her mother was, what she liked, whether she would have thought the water cycle project was cool. Would she have? Ryan smiled. Small and real. Sarah was a marine biologist. She would have had 20 questions and then suggested 3 improvements. Emma nodded slowly. She would have liked that Lily built it herself. Yeah, Ryan said. She would have. The kitchen was quiet for a moment in the good way. Ryan, Emma said. What happens after this? After Victor? After the vote? After everything gets settled? What do we do? He looked at her. She was looking at the table, Not at him, with the expression of someone asking a question they've been holding for a while. "What do you want to happen?" he said. She looked up. "I asked you first." "I know you did." "Ryan." He set down his coffee cup. "I want what's already happening," he said. "Lily knowing your name. You knowing where we keep the coffee. This." He gestured at the table, the kitchen, the house around them, being normal instead of an exception. Emma held his gaze for a long moment. "That's not a small thing," she said quietly. "No," he agreed. "It's not." "I'm not good at—" She stopped, started again. "I've been alone for a long time, by choice mostly, because it was easier than the alternative, and I told myself that was a decision I'd made rather than something I'd settled into." She paused. "I'm not always easy to be around." "Emma," Ryan said, "you color-code your evidence folders. That's called being organized. You texted me at 6:15 in the morning before you'd told me you'd found anything. I was being efficient. You are relentless and precise, and you don't stop until a thing is done, and you ask more questions than anyone I've ever met," Ryan said. "None of that is hard to be around. Some of that is the most—" He stopped himself, recalibrated. "I'm not asking you to be easy. I'm asking you to be here." The quiet that followed was not empty. It was the kind of quiet that settles after something true has been said out loud, and there's nothing left to do but let it be true. "Okay," Emma said. "Just that. Just okay." But the way she said it made it enough. 3 weeks later, Millbrook Pines held its special membership vote. Victor Langley was removed as HOA president by a margin of 31-4. The 4 dissenting votes were Connie Ashworth, her husband, and 2 other long-term Victor allies who left the meeting quickly and quietly and did not make eye contact with anyone on their way out. 2 months after the vote, the state attorney's office opened a formal investigation into the Green Valley Services contracts. Ryan and Emma were not the investigating parties. They had handed over their documentation, answered the questions they were asked, and stepped back. It was no longer their case to carry. It belonged to people whose job it was to carry it. Dave Kowalski was elected interim HOA president by a vote of 27-6. His first official act was to open the landscaping contract to competitive bidding. His second was to commission an independent audit of the association's finances going back 5 years. His third was to put a coffee maker in the community center because, as he said at the meeting, if they were going to start actually talking to each other, they should at least have decent coffee. Carmen Garcia came to Ryan's door 2 weeks after the vote with a container of tamales and stood on his front step and said, "We should have talked 3 years ago." "Yeah," Ryan said, "we should have." "My fence is still the same height." "Your fence is a perfectly normal height, Carmen." She pointed at him. "You're coming to dinner next Sunday, you and Lily, and bring Emma." He didn't argue. 6 months passed the way good months do, not slowly and not fast, but fully. With texture and weight and the particular richness of time that is actually being lived rather than endured. Lily turned 9. Emma helped Ryan plan the birthday party, not by taking it over, but by being the person Ryan could call at 10 at night when he was staring at a party supply website with the specific helplessness of a man who has successfully navigated naval operations but cannot decide between 2 nearly identical shades of purple balloon. She talked him through it. She showed up the morning of the party and helped hang streamers and did not make a big deal about any of it. Lily noticed anyway. Children always notice. One evening in October, 6 months after the fundraiser that had started everything, Ryan came home from a weekend drill to find Emma and Lily at the kitchen table together. Lily was doing homework. Emma was working on her laptop. They weren't talking. They were just in the same space, each doing her own thing, in the easy and unremarkable way of people who are comfortable enough with each other that silence doesn't need to be filled. Ryan stood in the doorway for a moment before either of them noticed him. He thought about the night of the fundraiser, about Emma's proposal and his stunned silence and the 40 minutes he'd spent deciding what to do. He thought about the kitchen table conversations and the color-coded folders and the meetings and the vote and all the things that had happened between that night and this one. He thought about what Emma had said that first morning in her kitchen. I've been watching you for 3 years and I'm tired of pretending I haven't been." He thought about what his daughter had told Emma about the water cycle. Same water, just goes around. "Hey," Emma said, looking up. "Hey," Lily said without looking up because she was at a critical point in her math worksheet and could not be interrupted. Ryan set his bag down, walked to the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water, and leaned against the counter and looked at the two of them at his table in his kitchen, in his house that had been very quiet for a very long time before it wasn't anymore. "How was drill?" Emma asked. "Long," he said. "Fine, the usual." He paused. "How's the project?" "Done," she said. "Or close enough. I'll look at it again tomorrow." "You'll look at it again tonight," he said. "Probably," she admitted. He pulled out the chair next to her and sat down. They didn't say anything else for a while. Lily worked through the rest of her math. Emma finished whatever she was reading. Ryan drank his water and let the quiet of the house settle around him in the particular way it had been settling lately, not as absence, but as presence. Not the quiet of a house missing something, but the quiet of a house that has enough. Later, after Lily was in bed, and Emma was getting her things to go back to her own house, still her own house, still her own life, the two of them moving toward something at a pace that felt right rather than rushed. Ryan stopped her at the front door. "Emma?" She turned. "A year ago," he said. "I was standing in my backyard at a fundraiser I didn't want to attend, pretending to have a good time, genuinely believing the woman across the yard found me somewhere between irritating and beneath notice." She looked at him with that direct gaze. And now she knows where I keep the good coffee, and my daughter asks about her when she's not here, and I—" He stopped, said the rest of it plainly because he was a plain-spoken man, and she deserved plain words. "I don't want to imagine going back to before. Any of it. The distance, the silence, any version of this street where we didn't end up here." Emma was quiet for a moment. Outside, Millbrook Pines was still. The houses down the street, dark or dimly lit, the neighborhood settling into its own evening. The Langley house had a for sale sign in the front yard, now had for 3 weeks. Nobody had commented on it much. There wasn't a great deal left to say. "Ryan," Emma said, "you know what I think about sometimes that first week after I moved in? I was standing at my kitchen window and I saw you in your driveway, helping Lily with her bicycle. She'd just learned to ride without training wheels, and she kept listing to one side, and you kept jogging alongside her with your hand, just barely on the back of the seat, not holding it, just there if she needed it." She paused. "I watched that for about 10 minutes, and then Connie called me and told me you'd been rude to her at the last HOA meeting, and I thought, okay, I must have misread him. I must have been wrong." Ryan listened. "I wasn't wrong," Emma said. "I was right the first time. I just let someone convince me I wasn't." He reached over and took her hand. Not dramatically, just reached over and held it the way people do when they've arrived somewhere real and want to mark it without making a production of it. "You weren't wrong," he said. "No," she said. "I wasn't." She squeezed his hand once, and then she was gone down the front steps and back to her house, her porch light coming on, the way it always did, steady and familiar. He stood in the doorway and watched it the way he'd been watching it for months now, not with longing, but with something quieter and more settled than longing. With the straightforward gladness of a man who knows where home is. He closed the door, went to check on Lily, who was asleep with her arm around a stuffed whale that had been her constant companion since she was 3, and that she would deny caring about if asked. Stood in the doorway of his daughter's room for a moment in the dark. 1 year ago, he had come home from deployment to a house that was his and a street that had never quite felt like it belonged to him. 1 year ago, he had believed with the tired certainty of a man who has accepted a situation that the distance between himself and the people around him was just the shape of his life. He had been wrong. The distance had been built by someone who needed it there. Brick by brick, lie by lie, small and careful and patient, until two people who lived 40 feet apart had come to believe they were strangers. What Victor Langley had never calculated in all his 6 years of strategic manipulation was the one variable he couldn't control. What happens when two people stop accepting the story they've been given and simply decide to find out the truth for themselves? He hadn't calculated Emma's folders. He hadn't calculated Ryan's patience. And he certainly hadn't calculated a single Saturday night that was supposed to mean nothing at a kitchen table that was supposed to be a waypoint between two people who were supposed to stay enemies. Some things, once they start, cannot be undone. And the best ones, the ones that matter, the ones that hold, don't start with perfect circumstances or clean beginnings or the absence of risk. They start with someone deciding that the story they've been told is not the story they're willing to live by. Ryan Carter had decided. Emma Hayes had decided first. And Millbrook Pines, for the first time in 6 years, was finally honestly completely free.